Hello and welcome everyone to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto Roundup for Friday, July 26th, 2024. Ron Quaranta here with my amazing co-host, the one, the only David Brill. I think Joshua, Ashley, Klayman, our other co-host, David will probably parachute in or the Gulfstream's landing someplace. Wait,
There she is.
here she is, I think. Before we begin, for everyone in the audience, thank you all so much for joining us. Please do keep in mind that nothing we're talking about should be considered accounting, investment, legal, or tax advice. Any tokens that David or Josh or I are talking about, we are not recommending. And then obviously these are our opinions and don't necessarily represent the opinions of our particular firms. Josh, good to see you. I think you are on location like David in Nashville somewhere.
I am indeed. And I'm so sorry to have missed you here, Ron. I know you were here earlier in the week.
I was there for the amazing EDAS conference. I couldn't stay for the Bitcoin conference, but lots to catch up on. David, Josh, let's just kick it off if we could. David, every time you and I have a conversation, we say, wow, there was a pretty action-packed week. Another week goes by and we're like, holy cow, there's so much to cover. Biden dropped out of the race, which is pretty monumental news. The markets have been pretty volatile. David, what are you seeing in this space? I think you're in Nashville as well. I'd love your perspective.
Yes, coming from Bitcoin 2024 as well, and a lot of interesting speakers here. I'm looking forward to hearing Senator Lomas speak today. And, there's Michael Saylor and a few other folks are speaking today. And then President Trump's going to be speaking tomorrow, former President Trump. So that hopefully that wasn't a purposeful slip. But anyway.
That was a crystal ball slip, I think.
That might have been a crystal ball slip. But so he'll be speaking tomorrow, and I'm really interested to hear what they have to say. But yes, markets have been volatile. With the ETH ETF launching, we're kind of seeing the same trading that we did with the Bitcoin ETF. We're just seeing nice volumes coming in, but a sell-off in ETH, mostly from the Grayscale product. A lot of outflows from the Grayscale product that's outscaling the inflows from the other products.
Yeah. David, on that point, and Josh, I definitely want to get your perspectives on Nashville. When we look at the ETH outflows, I think, we're at a couple of billion, if I recall correctly, but a good half of the flows were, like you said, were outflows from the Grayscale product. Do you think that's leveling off now? I mean, we're settling into this gold and silver kind of proposition for BTC ETFs and ETH ETFs. How do you see that playing out in the coming weeks?
I think it's just going to take a couple of weeks to unwind.
Yeah,
Look, people are going to move from a fund where you're paying 2.5% fee to funds that you can pay 0.25% fee.
Yeah.
So not everybody's going to do it the first day, but I think it's just going to unwind fairly quickly. And then I think we'll just see what the traditional, what the volumes will be going forward without the outflows. But I suspect we'll have a little, we had a little bit of a sell-off in ETH, and, I think it'll sort of mirror the original Bitcoin transactions and sort of the pricing. But then I think we'll see some acceleration as people get more excited about it.
Yeah. Josh, good to see you. Sorry we missed you in Nashville. What are you seeing on the ground in Nashville? I know you've probably got a lot of conversations lined up and you'll probably be crossing paths with David at some point. What are you seeing in Nashville? What have your thoughts been on the past week?
So I just arrived here yesterday. So I haven't been here for the whole week. But what I can say is it is a hub of energy. I mean, just not even counting the conference itself, just everywhere you go, people have been asking me for coffee, spontaneous meetings, deals getting done, even sitting in a hotel lobby or things like that, people chatting about deals right nearby. So definitely an exciting time. I know we always say builders keep building and things like that, but really I think, for myself, I have a bunch of meetings lined up, which is really, I would say, if I'm really being truthful about what motivated me to come here, I would say it's all of our colleagues and clients and stuff really coming here. But I agree with David and you just about the tremendous speeches. I'm really looking forward to seeing how they unfold. I think we saw reporting today about RFK Jr. saying that he is fully committed to Bitcoin and in fact disclosing, I believe, that the majority of his wealth is in Bitcoin. That's at least what CoinDesk is reporting. So, I mean, it's all good things. I'm very excited to hear about or hear some of the speeches, including I know David, you mentioned Senator Lummis. I know Kathy Wood's going to be speaking later today. So lots of interesting and good things.
David, I find it hysterical that Josh thinks she's going to sit in a hotel lobby someplace on a business trip and think someone's not going to want to have a business meeting with her immediately as soon as they see her.
I actually feel the same way, because I was sitting in my hotel the other day, and just a stream of people I like recognize or reconnected with, and I had a few meetings too. And it's just these kind of spontaneous things that happen at these conferences. But the world that like we've been fortunate to be in it so long that we just know a lot of the people and we get to see them, which is great. Yeah. The one thing I would add is there's a very big Bitcoin miner presence here at the conference, and there has been in the past, but I think this year in particular, it's very, very noticeable and very distinct. And a lot of miners are pretty bullish about what's coming forward, even after the halving. So I thought that was interesting and worth mentioning.
Lots of great presence in Nashville. David, I wanted to digress a little bit. I won't say rip up the script. It's a slight digression. One of the interesting things we've seen, and I think this has been potentially leaked from potential comments from former President Trump around a Bitcoin reserve for the United States. And I think I had read some data that said a future Trump administration would plan to hold a million Bitcoin. I'm probably messing that number up. David, what do you think there's benefit to that kind of talk? And do you think there's benefit in the long term? And Josh, I'd love your opinion on this as well, to the United States having a strategic reserve of Bitcoin like we have a strategic reserve of oil.
I mean, I think it's a fascinating idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm bullish long term on Bitcoin. So if the appreciation in Bitcoin is helpful to our country's bottom line, I think that's great. I don't know what, when we think about oil in a strategic reserve, it's like we could actually use the oil, in case of an embargo or an emergency. I don't know how we would necessarily implement Bitcoin in that reserve, so to speak. But I think as a store of value, I think it's a clever idea. And I think it's something that will be accretive going forward.
Josh, what do you think? And am I being too cynical on the idea that suddenly presidential candidates from both parties are pro-Bitcoin, or are they just grasping for contributions?
I mean, it's a question that we've been asking ourselves for a while. I mean, I do think, previously, certainly I agree with David with some of the skepticism that he's expressed just in terms of how real people's commitments are. But I don't know, as things have worn on, I know, weeks or months ago, we were talking about digital assets potentially being like a wedge issue in the election, but it seems to be more than that. I mean, like it, coming down the street and seeing in front of the music center, like the big, Bitcoin changeable, whatever it is, the signage, right? And then you see like former President Trump on one of the signs that flashes up. I mean, I feel like, crypto's hit the big time, kind of, at least in terms of this election. So I would say, though, it's so much has happened, as you noted at the beginning, just in terms of twists and turns. It's really a roller coaster ride in terms of this upcoming election. And I think it's I think it would be wrong to assume it doesn't have something to do with funding, but I don't think it's necessarily just that, especially if you look at some of the stances that, for example, Vance has taken in terms of regulation. But I do think, just in what you were saying about the strategic reserve, it did make me wonder, as you asked that, how much, do you guys know right now, like how much is the U.S. government holding in terms of Bitcoin that was seized? I mean, maybe it has a strategic reserve.
Yeah,
I think I recall. Oh, go ahead, Ron. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I don't remember the specific number.
I think it's around 200,000. That was my recollection, but we can fact check ourselves at some point. But I think it's around 200,000. So, Ron, what do you think about the Democrats or the Republicans taking a more pro Bitcoin stance? I mean, we definitely talked about this as an issue months ago on the podcast, but where do you feel the sentiment lies?
So you both know that I was pretty cynical when former President Trump said he's all in on Bitcoin several weeks ago. Then in the midst of the conversation about President Biden leaving, I think somewhere along the line, the DNC started or reached out to Coinbase of all organizations to take in donations in Bitcoin. And I really, in my mind, it was a very cynical play for votes at the margin, right? You know, the 1 or 2% or less that might be swayed by a crypto position. But I think, like all positions, this has evolved a bit. I think once they started having these conversations and started seeing the really large players in the space and seeing the news, David, you know, about tokenized funds, it's not just crypto per se, but it is blockchain and its impact on how our markets work. I just think both political parties are taking it a bit more seriously. And I think with President Biden stepping down from running for re-election, I'm not particularly clear on Vice President Harris's perspective, but if we read some of the news, they're having significant real discourse about what is crypto. And I think you can see that in some of the, I'm paraphrasing here, but some of the commentary from the likes of Senator Warren, for example. Some bills are starting to move forward. David and Josh, you might have seen this, and her immediate comment was, you know, this is insane. You know, I'm paraphrasing again, but basically not supportive of it in a really vocal way. I feel like we've reached a little bit of an inflection point as far as the parties go. I don't know if you both agree with that.
So, you know, as I've been thinking about it, I don't think at this point that we can really see a difference in the Democratic stance on crypto, because it's still the same players who have the major roles in it. And so unless we see, you know, Kamala Harris come out and say something really positive and be meaningful about it, I think, you know, the actions of the administration are kind of continue to be same as you know, business as usual. You know, Elizabeth Warren still is, you know, driving the banking committee, and you know, there's still these, you know, Wells notices that have gone out, and SAB 121 was rejected by, you know, was vetoed by President Biden. So right now, to me, I think the Republicans have more credibility of moving on this issue, and we just have to wait and see what the Democrats have to say.
Josh, what do you think?
So it's interesting. There's a Fortune article right now that I can't read because it is behind a paywall.
Oh.
But it appears to be written by someone named Neve Rowe. If I'm saying that correctly, it's Niamh. I think that said Neve. And the headline says, Kamala Harris likely to share Bitcoin stance in coming weeks. Industry optimists note her husband is a, quote, crypto guy, end quote. So, yeah, I mean, and the only part of the article I can read, I will just read it right now. It says, a rumor swept like wildfire across the crypto world social media accounts this week. The Democratic Party's new standard bearer, Kamala Harris, was, quote, in talks with the organizers of Bitcoin 2024 to address the annual industry conference where her rival Donald Trump is slated to speak. They're making up their minds today, organizer David Bailey tweeted on Tuesday afternoon. My understanding is that she will not be attending,
Right.
although I just think it's really interesting that this is making its way into Fortune articles. And I would love to know if you guys have any insight into whether whether Doug Emhoff, I guess our second husband, is that what? Second gentleman.
Second gentleman, I believe is the phrase.
Second husband.
I don't know anything about the man personally. I don't know what insights. I don't have any insights to lend. I mean, you know, David, I'd love your input, Josh, and it's a really good point. I had seen that article. I don't think I read the entirety of the article, but I wonder also, David, how much of this is predicated on who Vice President Harris picks as a running mate?
You know, I was thinking about that too, Ron. I think ultimately this one's going to come from the top, and ultimately it's going to be sort of her call as far as how she views her administration's view on it. But I think the reason why I'm a little more skeptical is that the entrenched, you know, representatives on the Democratic side really have shown what they are and what they believe, and we've been living it for the last 4 years. So unless Kamala comes out with a really strong view and, you know, principles about what she would do if she leads, you know, a Democratic administration, it's very hard for me not to take it anything as more as business as usual. And it's going to be show me, not tell me.
But agree with your point, David, and that's actually very, very well put. Certainly better put than I did. But David, Josh, the other aspect of this, I wonder when we look at a potential Harris administration, how much of that will be informed by the things we're seeing happening with the regulators and the courts. So, relative successes on some court cases, some setbacks certainly. We're looking, Josh, you mentioned SAB 121, and in many minds, when the president vetoed the repeal of SAB 121, a lot of folks said this is it. Custodian is not going to be able to hold it. And then we immediately heard, well, the SEC is kind of tweaking SAB 121. So I wonder, is this a bit of that positioning, David, as well? Josh, David, do you have any thoughts about that?
I'll let Josh go.
No.
I definitely have thoughts about it, but I want Josh to weigh in.
So when you say a bit of this positioning, are you talking about now the kind of scramble to kind of maybe step back from what's perceived to be Biden's view of digital assets, or
I feel, the pull away from Operation Choke Point 2.0, destroy crypto. I don't feel like it's Project Destroy Crypto anymore. It's not crypto friendly. You're not going to see laser eyes for Kamala Harris on Twitter, but is there a chance that some of that is evolving?
I mean, certainly. I think I would imagine that after seeing the pushback on SAB 121, as you just noted, if I were a strategist, I might say, hey, clearly this path is not so popular. Maybe this is a good opportunity for sort of a retrade or an adjustment at a logical point. It is interesting. I guess it will be interesting to see because Kamala Harris is now being, well, of course, she was a prosecutor, right? But that's one of the things that has been, set as a counterpoint to former President Trump, right? And so interesting to see whether from a prosecutor's point of view, I believe she was quoted at one point, at least I saw in an article, talking about that she had emphasized that Bitcoin was an attractive tool for criminals seeking to evade authority surveillance. Now that was something that was noted in Coin Tribune recently, but I haven't heard her specifically say that, but it is an interesting thing to think about. I think also what is an interesting counterpoint, I keep saying interesting, because it is.
It's all interesting.
Is that I had heard somewhere that if elected, Kamala Harris would be expected to perhaps fire or do something else with not anything bad. That sounded horrible the way I just said that, with Lena Khan. Whereas if we think of JD Vance, he actually has been reported to have applauded Lena Khan's efforts to break up some of the big tech strongholds. So,
Josh, thanks so much. Josh, David, it makes me think of the policy updates we do. And again, shout out to Dina Ellis and Adam Goldberg. I want to raise this at the next one. David, I want to say something that's probably more politically provocative than I mean it to be, given the theme of what we're supposed to be talking about. But do you get the sense that both the Republicans and Democrats are becoming more populist in their relative vertical? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Look, I want to digress to the point we were talking about before, and then I'll hit that. This sort of giving people one-off approvals, or exemptions from SAB 121. We talked about that on our last podcast and how, that's something I don't think people are really comfortable with. Yeah. And I just wanted to mention this because, after our podcast, Commissioner Pierce came out and really said exactly the same thing, that she did not favor the sort of one-off reviews and one-off exemptions to it. And so I think that's really worth mentioning because we don't know what the exemptions that they're getting are. We might be assuming it's custodying Bitcoin, but it could be just being able to custody tokenized securities. So we really don't know what it is. And so until we know what it is, it's just sort of this little bit of a black box. So I think that's worth mentioning. To your other point, I think the Republicans, through the bills that they put forward and the advocacy that they've had in the last 4 years, have a real track record of being supportive of, the Bitcoin, being supportive of Bitcoin and the crypto industry. And I think the actions of the Democrats over the last 4 years and the administration has shown what their view is. So my kind of view is, while it may be populist feeling, I feel like with the Republicans, they've sort of backed it up, and with the Democrats, we're kind of just hoping to see, are they changing their mind or not? And I think a couple of things to think about is, if Commissioner Crenshaw's term is extended, and if Chairman Gensler were to stay on in a Democratic administration, it's hard for me to really see much change in the viewpoint on the Democratic side.
Yeah. Josh, weigh in on this. And also, are you as unsurprised as I am that Commissioner Peirce is probably listening to David Brill when he talks about his crystal ball and coming out and kind of citing those things? I'm just paraphrasing, but I'm just saying there was a definite possibility. Josh, what do you think?
I mean, well, on that point, again, nothing we say is investment advice, but if David's crystal ball develops a fund, let me know.
We're in.
But yeah, I mean, I wish we knew more. I do think that so long as Gensler stays at the SEC, I would imagine it's going to be pretty much. We already know what his positions generally are, and unless there's some big sea change or big push, I don't know that he's likely to change his views. I mean, I will say, from some with whom I've spoken, who perhaps are a bit closer to folks at the SEC, some people have said, that notwithstanding public opinion, Gary Gensler is unlikely to change his views in their view because he evidently really believes in what he's saying, right? And so I think whether that's true or not sure. But yeah, I mean, I guess, do either of you guys have any sense about how Kamala Harris feels about Chair Gensler or anything like that?
It sounds like the crowds are gathering around you, Josh.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I'll just weigh in. I still, politics aside, David, I don't have a clear sense of that position. It'll be interesting to see the team that's built around her and what some of those potential nominations might look like. But David, what are your thoughts?
I mean, look, if she had a very strong view on it, I think we might have heard about it or heard her say, maybe counterbalance the president a little bit, not disagreeing with him, but just sort of having more of an open view. My sense is that I don't think this was high on her radars. There were a lot of other issues, immigration and some of the other big issues of the campaign that were more of her mandate. So I think maybe over the next few weeks, we'll get a better sense of like her taking a view and thinking about it and coming up with a position. So I think in fairness to her, I don't know that this was on her radar amongst her different portfolio of things. So I think it's an opportunity for her to develop a position and see what that is.
Yeah, and in fairness to the vice president, this happened pretty quickly, and she's hit the ground running, and that's not easy work. So it'll be interesting to see how some of these policy positions develop out. David, let's pivot to the macroeconomic stuff. Josh, I'm going to bore you with some of the stats that came out this morning, but I love your input as well. David, the PCE number, the personal consumption expenditures number, which is the Fed's preferred gauge of inflation. Please don't ask me to define PCE. Came out and met expectations. So, there's this growing perspective that, inflation is cooling on target. The economy is still percolating along, but not too strongly. And they call it often, David, this kind of Goldilocks scenario where we could be seeing a potential interest rate cut in September. It was a volatile market week, David, but are we also looking at a Goldilocks scenario for crypto after September?
Look, I think the market is sort of pricing in that we're going to get a cut in September and a view that we'll continue to get cuts. And so you're seeing like the small caps, and I don't mean the small cap crypto tokens, but the small cap stocks really have a rally. And they haven't had a rally like this in many years. And it's really based on the idea that the interest rates cuts will come, and we'll see a number of them, and that it will be cheaper to borrow. And a lot of small cap companies need to borrow to grow. And so, that's a very positive narrative. So I think the market is signaling that they believe that it'll be a better environment to be investing in, that we'll have lower rates. And I think lower rates are really good, and a weaker dollar is really good for crypto. And, I've said on our show that I do believe we'll see an all-time high in Bitcoin before the end of the year, if not sooner. And, I kind of think we'll get to 90 or 100,000. But so to answer your question, yes, I think it is positive. I will say this, that I do think that there's this breaking line between, I think, people who are doing well in this economy and then people who are struggling.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, you have a lot of people who have done well with stock appreciation, but these 90-day delinquencies on credit cards, the car repossessions are going up, more evictions are coming, housing taking longer to sell. Those to me are all very meaningful predictors that I don't think are being factored in.
Yeah.
And then when you add in, food is definitely more expensive and travel has been more expensive, and rents and housing have been more expensive. It's just hard to see. I think the soft landing we may see is for corporates, but not for individuals. And so that's where I think the line may come.
David, that's a really good point. And Josh, I definitely want to pull you into this conversation. I forgot who it was, forgive me, but there was a former Federal Reserve governor that asked I think a Federal Reserve governor that asked the question, why is the Fed waiting to cut interest rates? And those factors you mentioned, David, the delinquencies are rising, home inventories are kind of stacking up, may mean a harder landing for a particular segment of the population, which is always a difficult thing. Josh, I wanted to pull you into this, and I want to create a new economic index. David, I'd love your help on this. It'll be based on the number of clients knocking on Josh's door to get involved in the crypto space and needing her legal advice. And I'm pretty sure that will parallel price increases in the future. Josh, I hope you don't mind me creating the Josh index, but would love your perspectives as well.
So no, I don't mind you creating the index. I'm not sure exactly.
She's going to kill me, David, when she's back in New York.
Poorly. But what I would say, just echoing what you guys are saying about the harder landing for some, I mean, not even necessarily a landing. I would. Okay, so you guys know this about me, but I spend some of my free time when I'm trying to get downtime looking at what I refer to as mom boards, right, online, which are these random anonymous often posts. And I also, on certain social media, there are certain town pages that are near my town, and I just peruse them at times. And it's really interesting. This has nothing to do with crypto, but I will just say the nature of the comments in many cases, referring to people unable to find apartments, people having to stay together when they want to, I hate to say it, divorce, right? Because these are gossip words in large part. Or is it okay to date someone who's still living with a roommate at such and such an age? And people are like, well, it's okay now because no one can afford anything in this economy. I would say that's very telling, and I'm sort of making light of it, but I really think it's true. I think sometimes we're in a bit of a bubble, not just because of our industry, but just also because of maybe our clients or our friends and stuff. And I think, a lot of people are feeling the pain in a serious way that they weren't before just a few years ago. So I think, that might not be a very good index either, but it just. And I realize it's anecdata, it's not actually data, but I would say there's a fair number of comments like that.
Yeah.
And with the private credit market, I mean, what I've heard generally is that while borrowers, they don't yet know when a rate cut will come, they're pretty confident, and lenders are pretty confident there's not going to be a rate hike, and that is what's causing people really to begin. Really, this backlog of deals that has been piling up.
Josh, David, thanks so much. Great question from Mr. Tavares. Thank you so much. David, you and I have chatted about this as well. I think the three of us have. What do you think of the upcoming Solana ETF? We had a fascinating conversation, Josh, last week at our legal working group meeting, if you recall, and we were talking about the Solana ETF that might be upcoming. And we asked a question, does an ETF necessarily need a futures market to trade? And I think the answer, Josh, I will never know all the way you and the others on the legal working group do, was that you don't necessarily need a futures market. There are ways to do it, but it's hard. Do either of you have a perspective on a Solana ETF?
So Well, I'm in favor of a Solana ETF as long as there's this question over the classification of whether Solana is a
Yep.
commodity or a security.
Yep.
I don't see that happening in the near term. And Solana was mentioned in the Binance litigation as a security by the SEC in their complaint against Binance. And so, unless the SEC has changed its mind on the classification of Solana, I don't really see a Solana ETF this year for sure. And we'll have to see if there's potential litigation around the status of Solana before, it gets resolved. So it's either, the SEC comes out and clarifies its view on Solana, which, it's not even clear they've clarified their view on Ethereum, just other than letting the ETF be approved. But I think, unfortunately, we're still a bit away from a Solana ETF, and it's something I do not think we'll see this year.
And the CFTC has been a bit more clear on what they do or don't consider. Josh, weigh in on that. I'm sorry I cut you off.
Oh, no worries, Ron. So I agree with what was said. I think also, Solana was named in multiple of the actions against trading platforms. However, to my knowledge, no suit has been brought against them directly, right? So it's, as our friend Kayvon Siddiqui, I think, once called them, or maybe it was Jason Gottlieb, one of them, or maybe it was Drew Hinkes, actually it was Drew Hinkes, who called it like a SEC drive-by. With these sorts of cases. It was Drew. Sorry, Drew. But yeah, so I think that I agree. We need to have that figured out. I also do think, I recall seeing some sort of a filing relating to the CBOE and potentially having Solana futures, right? I think one of the reasons, although folks, including, frankly, David and also Greg X and others, Anne-Marie Tierney, have much more insight into this than I do. But my understanding is one of the reasons that the futures market often comes first is because of the surveillance sharing and having that kind of market manipulation, checks is important. So, yeah, it will be great to see more crypto ETFs and frankly, more crypto futures. But I think the crystal ball, at least for me, remains a bit unclear. Or actually, the magic 8 ball, as I've said.
Magic 8 ball, yes.
Outlook unclear.
Oh, yeah. David, let's do a follow-up with that because I find it interesting. And Josh, name dropping all of our friends in the legal space that are focused on this. Well done, Josh. David, one of the other pressures we've seen, aside from the lack of regulatory clarity, we keep hearing about the sell-offs from old cases. And I'm talking about the Mt. Gox, Mt. Gox moving BTC. I think we've seen some others. Do you see this as continued downward pressure, or has that kind of exhausted itself?
It's amazing. And by the way, yes, I think Drew Hinkes was the one who said the drive.
Shout out to Drew.
Drew, I actually saw him last night, and so yes, I'll talk to him when I see him again. But
get him on the show.
Yeah, we should have him on the show. I was actually talking to Dan Stabile at Winston Strawn about joining for an episode, and he's interested in joining. So we should do that. Yes, we have what's the equivalent of a stock overhang. We have a crypto overhang, and we have sort of the token boogeyman of Mt. Gox. There's some rumors that Genesis is selling some tokens. The U.S. government still has some tokens. So we do have this overhang, of Bitcoin and in some cases Ethereum that sort of need to be unwound in the market. The Mt. Gox one is less clear. People had to wait 10 years to get their token, so certainly some people will want to sell right away. But a lot of institutions bought up the claim, so I don't know if it'd be prudent for them just to hold on to it right now for a number of reasons. But I think that we do have this kind of boogeyman bankruptcy overhang that's still being worked through. But I think a lot of it has been worked through. And I think we just have a few piles left, so to speak.
David, thanks so much. Josh, I know you've got to hop soon. Low battery, lots of demand for FaceTime at the event, plus work and business meetings. Give us your closing thoughts before you jump back on the Gulf Stream, Josh.
So I'm not quite jumping onto the Gulf Stream yet, but I think my closing thoughts are I'm excited to be here in Nashville. I'm really excited to see what unfolds in the next 2 days. like today and tomorrow, and I'm super excited to see what happens at the end of this week, because literally every week it's like a game of pinball. You don't know what's coming next. So
Yep. Understood. I know you got to hop, Josh. We'll talk again soon. Thank you for being here and being on location as well. David, I want to thank and reach out to Raphael Frankenberg, who essentially has given us our next webinar. And I don't know if you want to address the comment, Raphael, but thank you so much. In a separate but related conversation, that is commodity-backed cryptocurrencies like those tied to silver or gold, impact, stability, and adoption. It's a really good conversation because I think the overlay of a lot of this, David, and correct me if I'm wrong, is always, well, what's the regulatory perspective on that? What are your thoughts?
Well, look, robust commodity markets have existed for quite a while.
Yep.
Gold is a mature market, and so is silver. So I think the market structure is there to have more cryptocurrencies, to have ETFs. And like we've seen the success in the Bitcoin ETF, and I believe, a successful launch in the Ethereum ETF. So I think the market structure is there. I think it's demand. But I also think that, we're not seeing all the demand. Like we've talked about, the wirehouses still haven't green lighted, access to, cryptocurrency ETFs. And, the more I've been thinking about it, Ron, I think I'm kind of hopeful now with the Ethereum ETF launch and it seemingly to have gone well from a market structure position that maybe by the end of the summer, we see one or two of the major wirehouses, pull the trigger. It will have been 6 months already, and that maybe we'll see, customers having access in their accounts in some of the major wirehouse banks. So to answer Raphael's question, I think the existing market structure is important. I think obviously gold is at near all-time high and has been continuing to do well. So I think those are the backgrounds for successful crypto ETFs from a market structure perspective.
David, I want to add one thing to that, and it's a really well taken point, but to Raphael's comment as well. I think the other challenge, both either perceptually or in operation, is the challenges we've seen around confirming reserves and holdings of things that are backed by other assets. For a long time, one of the things I'm going to say, and I'm not trying to put them in the same bucket, but think of Tether. For a long time, where the reports were, well, it's holding billions of dollars in treasuries, for example, and it was pretty difficult to confirm any of that. So to Raphael's point, I think one of the challenges there as well, and David, tell me if you agree or disagree, is how do we confirm those reserves? How do we confirm the holdings underpinning some of those? That is a critical part of that conversation.
Well, I would say with Tether that they've done a good job now of being much more, being transparent, and we have a good sense of their treasuries. And, in fairness to them, I think what was required to be shown was never really fully documented, especially since they're outside the US. But I think they've gone to great lengths to sort of show what they have and match it up. But I think one of the nice things about any, Ethereum or Bitcoin ETF is, you can see the contract addresses and you can know how much is there and where it's sitting, and the likely custodians, because there are only a couple of them. So I think in some ways you have more transparency with those ETFs than you do with a gold or a silver ETF. Because nobody, I'm not sure how they, prove at the end of a certain period that the ETF has that much physical gold or physical silver. I'm sure there's a way they go about it, but
sure,
the blockchain is really effective in proving that.
David, good point. Well said. Raphael, great question. Thanks so much for raising it. David, we're approaching the end here, so I guess I want to talk a little bit about the stuff we've got coming up both next week. And as you end a long, hard week in Nashville and you head to Puckett's Barbecue on 4th Avenue North in Nashville for a rack of ribs and a nice cold one, what are you going to be focusing on in the coming week? We've got a lot going on, but I'd love your thoughts about your perspectives.
Sure. Well, the first thing is I want to do a little shout out to Jeff and Ruby's. I had dinner there on Wednesday night, and the steak was really excellent. If you're in Nashville and you want to have a good steak, I would recommend that. And I'm not one who's easy to please when it comes to the steak and food. And
that is true, folks.
That is true. And this was really an excellent meal. So I would give them a shout out. So, I'm really interested to see what Senator Lummis and, former President Trump say tomorrow, today and tomorrow. And I have a suspicion that if if people like what they have to say and, they really talk about a Bitcoin reserve and, having legislation to enable a Bitcoin reserve, and maybe there's some other surprises that we're not aware of. It would not surprise me if we, push towards 70,000 and maybe an all-time high, touch it next week. I think we could see a really positive week coming out of crypto, barring some, sort of non-crypto related event. I will say one thing with the Olympics coming. I am a little concerned that, if there's something that were to happen in the Olympics, that might change the view of the market, but hopeful that that doesn't happen. As far as next week goes, really going to be doing a lot of reading and really, decompress, sort of like analyzing what's been said at the conference, and then going to be sneaking away for a day to go to Gainesville, Florida, to take my daughter to see University of Florida. So I'll have a little family time built in. But I think a lot of people are going to be digesting what's been said, and maybe we hear more from the Democrats, and we hear more from Kamala Harris about her views. Maybe she waits till the whole conference is over and sort of gets briefed on it and comes out with some sort of view after the conference.
David,
what about you, Ron? What?
I was going to say, no matter what happens, it's going to be pretty wild and crazy between now and Election Day, and maybe even after that. Like you, I had the opportunity to be in Nashville. I couldn't do Bitcoin 2024, so I'm so glad you and Josh and so many other members are there. Pardon me. I had the opportunity to do the Electronic Digital Asset Summit with our friends at Bitwave. Shout out to Pat White, Amy Kalnoki, and the entire team. They did a really, really nice event at the Woolworth Theater. A lot of great thought leadership. The other thing I'm looking at, David, is really trying to understand the ongoing economic data. I could be wrong. I think jobs data comes out next week. We're looking at an impending Fed conversation in the coming weeks as well. So I'm really interested to see where that goes. So yeah, it's a busy summer. I'll be keeping track of some of the economic data. Waiting for you guys to get back to New York. We have a lot of work to do. And the big October 24th event that we're planning, David, our WSBA Global Summit, where we'll have bankers, investors, technologists, super smart lawyers, a couple of surprise speakers that we're working on as well. And David, I'm grateful for all the work you've helped with that. So looking forward to that conversation. For everyone else in the audience, thank you for joining us. We'll be on YouTube with the recording shortly after this. David, we've got a special guest next week joining us. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, or we keep it a surprise?
Well, I mean, I think we can keep it a little bit of a surprise, but I think what we can say is that we have really one of the most influential people when it comes to advocating for crypto in the court system.
Yep.
I know him very well, and we will tease his coming in the notes for next week. But it's one session of ours you'll really want to listen to. Somebody who's filed amicus briefs in some of the major crypto cases here in the U.S. and really an invaluable perspective on the legal process.
Looking forward to having our guest. David, we'll leave it there. For everyone who joined us, thank you so much for your time.